Malala Yousafzai aptly said, "There are two powers in the world. One is the sword and the other is the pen. But there is a third power which is more stronger, that is of women's." Ladies and gentlemen, warm greeting to each and every one of you. Welcome to celebrate the International Women's Day at IIT Delhi. I am Preetha Ganguly, a PhD scholar from the Department of Biochemical Engineering and Biotechnology. And it's my immense pleasure to host this beautiful afternoon. The International Women's Day is celebrated on March 8 because of a strong connection of women's movement during Russian Revolution 1917. Today we have gathered to celebrate the achievements, resilience and invaluable contributions of women in every field of work. This day not only makes the progress towards gender equality and women empowerment, but also serve as a moment of reflection towards acknowledging accomplishments. So, let's put a moment of reflection towards acknowledging accomplishment while striving for even greater momentum. It's an opportunity to honor the extraordinary impact of the women and stand united advancing gender equality across globe. This year, as we know, that the theme of International Women's Day is accelerated action. So as we celebrate this day, let's take a moment to acknowledge the countless contribution of women in shaping our society and also paving for a more inclusive future. Without a further ado, let's formally commence this event. It is my immense pleasure to invite our esteemed director, Professor Rangan Banerjee, under whose leadership IIT Delhi continues to thrive as a global hub for scientific advancement, interdisciplinary collaboration, and technical innovation. He has been a strong ally and advocate for gender equality. Please welcome Professor to share his thoughts.
Good afternoon and greetings to everyone on our celebration of International Women's Day. At IIT Delhi, we would like to celebrate women not only on this one day, but we want to actually see that we move towards gender parity. Historically, the IITs and we have actually been a male-dominated institution from the initiation. And I was just recently, we had this 1975 batch. There was not a single woman graduate in that batch. So we have, today, if we look at the numbers, we have 105 faculty members in our 642 faculty members. It's about 16% faculty. Around 21% of our staff are women. 25% of our students, 3,200 women students, and a reasonably large number in the PhDs. So last year in our convocation, we actually had 200 women graduates with PhD degrees. So we are improving on our gender parity, but we have a long way to go. And we have taken a number of different steps, and I'd like to extend our gratitude to the IJs, to our Dean ODI's office. We are tracking the data, we are looking at ways, a number of things that we are trying to do. One is to try and have an enabling and inclusive environment. And in this, one of the things that we have done is, for the first time, we now have a private space for women in the main building for young mothers for lactation and feeding, and that has just been started. We are going to have similar spaces in other locations. We are looking at influencing the external environment, and I'm delighted to see so many of you from the schools who are here. We have this initiative where we encourage school children from this region to come and explore and see what an IIT Delhi education and what research can do. And we've been very encouraged with the kind of response that we've had. We are going to create a series of awards for impact of women, and this is for our own, to encourage our women faculty members, and subsequently we will also do a similar set of awards for women staff. As we go, as we go forward, I hope that one day we will come to a situation where the percentage of women in our faculty, staff, and students will be 50%, and where gender will cease to be an issue on our campus, and we should actually move forward in that direction. And of course, we do have a long way to go, but we are moving in the right direction, and we'd like to listen to all of you. This is important for us as an institution in terms of creating a good, inclusive environment, and also in terms of enhancing our impact, because women add to, and in terms of performance, in terms of the way in which you look at things, this is something that is essential for our institute to move forward. I'd like to say that we are delighted to have Dr. Soumya Swaminathan with us today, and we are really looking forward to her talk, to initiate this celebration and to discuss with all our colleagues, our women colleagues, and also some of our male colleagues who are here. And I think that we really look forward to seeing that we make IIT Delhi a go-to place for women engineers, scientists, researchers, and also from the humanities and social sciences. So this is something that we like to not just restrict it to a celebration in the International Women's Day, but make it a part of our actual operation and going forward. So we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like to take all the lessons and then imbibe it and practice it as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Ashish and Anu as the sign language interpreters. Now it's my pleasure to invite Professor Shilpi Sharma, the Associate Dean Academics, Outreach and New Initiative at IIT Delhi, to introduce our distinguished speaker of today's event. Please put your hands together for the professor.
I would like to start with highlighting the theme for this International Women's Day, which is Accelerate Action. And we couldn't have actually had a more befitting speaker than the one we have today. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to introduce you all to the speaker for the day, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. While the participation for the event is a strong indicator of her popularity, I will not let go this opportunity to talk very briefly about her. Dr. Soumya is the chairperson of the S Swaminathan Research Foundation, but before fitting into her father's shoes, carrying a legacy, she had already made a mark as a physician, a scientist, and an international health leader par excellence. She has many feathers in her cap, the prominent ones being her role as WHO's first chief scientist, Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research, Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research, Principal Advisor to National Tuberculosis Elimination Program of Government of India, and the list goes on. She was instrumental in setting up COVAX to ensure equitable vaccine distribution in low and middle income countries during the pandemic. Through her extensive body of work, she has made a significant contribution towards bridging the gap between science and healthcare at both the national and the international levels. A pediatrician and world-renowned expert in tuberculosis and HIV research, she is a fellow of the US National Academy of Medicine, the Academy of Medical Sciences of UK, and all major science academies in India. She holds honorary doctorates from prestigious institutions including Karolinska Institute, EPFL Louvain, and the McGill University, London. Her journey is indeed commendable. During a visit to MSSRF a fortnight back, I got the opportunity to witness the incredible things the foundation is doing in offering back to the society. Without much ado, let's welcome on stage Dr. Soumya Swaminathan to talk on holding up half the sky. A warm round of applause for her, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction, dear Director, Dean, and students, faculty members. Thanks for inviting me today. And it's wonderful also to see school students here. Currently, as Shilpi mentioned, I'm chairing the S Swaminathan Research Foundation that was set up by my father about 35 years ago, really to link science and society. And he always felt that there was a lot of scope for taking science and technological advancements that are happening in our labs across and in academia across the country to benefit rural and tribal women and men, particularly the farming and fishing communities in our country. So while I'm a medical doctor, I felt that this is a cause to which I'm also very, very close. And it's came very naturally to link health with agriculture, nutrition, and rural development, because ultimately these are all interlinked. And as you know, they are just about 5 years away from the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. The world had committed to achieving these 17 goals. Each of them have several indicators. And the Niti Aayog in India puts out a report every year on how we are doing on these SDGs, both by the SDG 1 to 17 as well as by state. And so we have made a lot of progress. Our, I think, overall score is something like 71 out of 100. But where we're not doing so well is in two SDGs, SDG 2 and SDG 5. And SDG 2 relates to reducing hunger and malnutrition. And we can talk a little bit over there, but of course the indicators there are around under 5 child malnutrition, wasting, stunting, where we're still way higher than where we should be. About a third of our children are stunted. And stunting means not just physical stunting and being short, but it's brain development. And so for a third of children born in this country, they're born with a low birth weight. And secondly, most of the brain development occurs in the first 5 years of life. And so if they don't get that nutrition as well as the enabling environment, they can neither grow physically nor cognitively and intellectually. And so it's really all about the human capital for the future. And these things are also intergenerational. So for example, a malnourished child will grow up to be a woman who will never reach her full potential in terms of physical or mental growth. And when she has children, then that impact is passed on to the next one. So this is called an intergenerational equity issue. So it's not just limited to one generation, but it continues to the others. And this is why the first 1,000 days of life in particular are so critical. So it's not just focusing on a woman after she becomes pregnant. A lot of our health programs tend to focus on pregnancy and right after childbirth. So in fact, one of the previous secretaries of health, a man, used to jokingly say that this seems to be the ministry of pregnant women, because we don't seem to bother about anyone else, except once a woman becomes pregnant, then our focus is on her. But actually we need to look at the whole life cycle from birth to elderly. And as we are growing, developing socioeconomically, our lifespan is increasing. Currently it's around 70, 72 years. So we're definitely going to have more older people, men and women. Women outlive men generally. And so we also have to start thinking about the needs of older people, older women, those who need assistive devices. It's a huge topic that I was also involved in at the WHO, because we recognize that globally there's a huge unmet need for even simple things like spectacles and hearing aids. And only 10% of people globally who need them actually get them, let alone things like wheelchairs and canes and other more advanced devices for people who can't or not mobile. So we're going to have all of those challenges coming up as well. But the other SDG where we are not doing well is SDG 5, which is gender equality, where we are scoring only 49 out of 100. So there's a huge scope for us to improve. Some states, there are many indicators within that. Women's access to education, which has really improved. We find now, very high participation of women, of girls in primary, secondary, and tertiary education. And then there's women's access to employment. There's gender-based violence. There are child care policies, whether we have them or not. So there are many sub-indicators under that SDG 5, and clearly a lot of states are not doing as well. So we do have this divide within the country also, where particularly some of the northern and central states of India are doing worse on these gender equality indicators, and that's pulling everyone down. The other thing that's much talked about these days is the participation of women in the labor workforce, and there's this constant debate going on in the media about why it is low and what can we do to increase it. Now, to me, it's actually very, very clear and straightforward. So for a woman to go out of home and work, what does she need? Of course, she needs to have had that education and the skills, but we know in India now that many women who have had the education and the opportunity to get trained or skilled still do not participate in the workforce, and the majority of women who are in the workforce are unpaid and doing family labor. So whether you're doing work at home or you're working on your own agricultural land, which is in the name of your husband, but the husband has migrated to the city and leaving the woman to work that land, she has no access to any of the resources like credit and so on that the man would have, because the piece of land is not in her name. And in fact, in that particular statistic, apparently, we're actually doing worse. We've gone down in terms of the number of women who own land in their name. And even in South Asia, actually, India does very poorly on that particular statistic. Countries like Vietnam, much more gender equality in the ownership. So there's a big move now, of course, to digitize land ownership, and I hope that this actually gets addressed during that time. Otherwise, we'll be perpetuating, just going from physical to digital doesn't mean that we're actually addressing the root problem here, which is inheritance of land. And even if the woman is working the land, she's not. The same thing happens in many of our government policies, which focus on the needs of men. For example, I was in Rameshwaram and speaking to a group of fisherwomen, and they were telling me these are traditional seaweed fisherwomen. It's very interesting that they dive, free dives, what is called free dives. They don't use a cylinder oxygen or anything. They just hold their breath, and they've just got trained over many years. In their saris, they just hitch up the saris. The only thing they do wear is goggles, and they go and they collect seaweed. So the men actually take them out on the boat, and then the men sit and smoke bidis, because I asked the men, what do you do while the women are diving? And they said, no, we can't stay underwater for so long and all that. So we stay on the boat, little bit help we do, but we have to have our bidis, and they're chatting. These women, even up to the age of 70, I saw, they dive and they collect seaweed. And of course, with climate change now, all of these traditional livelihoods are getting impacted. So the same women who used to bring 40 kilos of seaweed in a bag, on a sack in her back, now brings 10 kilos. So incomes have gone down, and they were saying that the shells they used to bring from underwater and sell, there are no more shells left in that ocean bed over there, and neither are there prawns and crabs. So from 3 different things they used to bring to sell, they only now bring seaweed, and that too very little. But the thing is, and there's another group of women I met who belong to a scheduled tribe community called Irula. They're traditionally considered to be very, very bottom of even the scheduled tribes. They are the ones who catch snakes and rats. They used to live as more or less bonded labor in the villages around the mangroves of Pichavaram near Chidambaram. And they do another kind of traditional prawn fishing, which is going into the shallow water around the estuary area, where the river is actually meeting the sea, which is where the mangrove forests are, and using their hands, groping for prawn and crabs and picking them up. And this is what they've been doing for generations, taught by their mothers. And they get a lot of occupational health injuries, in the sense that they get cuts and they have a lot of skin infections. They're exposed to the sun and the sea and the salt water, so they have a lot of issues of fungal infections. They age very quickly, and they also get cataracts. So there are many occupations where women are more salt pan workers also. I don't know how many of you have gone to salt pans, but it's salt is something we take for granted, right? We can't live without salt. And yet when you see how that salt is produced and the kind of drudgery that goes into producing salt, where these women basically, some men, but again majority women, work in the salt pans during the hottest times of the year and the day, raking that salt in the water and helping it to dry, and then making piles of it. And they don't even have a place to rest, no shade, because these salt pans are just exposed. And so when I ask them, what do you do the whole day? Where do you go to the bathroom? They say we don't eat or drink because there is no toilet, there is no shade. And so we eat at 4 in the morning before we go, and then we come back in the afternoon, and then only we cook, we feed our children, and we also eat. And because of that, they get urinary tract infections, they get kidney disease, hypertension. So there are lots of connections between health, occupation, and the gendered nature of work that doesn't strike many of us, especially those of us, like I also grew up in Delhi, in a city, and got exposed to these things only because of my travel in rural areas. So while the Chinese proverb, women hold up half the sky, which was also a famous book by Nicholas Kristof, then was made into a film as well, talks about very extreme situations of violence, of sex slavery, of prostitution, and so on. But in our day-to-day lives, there is so much of imbalance, and not because we want, or that men want these things to happen, but very often we are blind to them. Another example is we looked at heat action plans. As you know, heat is going to be one of the major health issues for us due to global warming and climate change. Countries like India are going to be disproportionately impacted because all countries around the equator are going to be impacted. In fact, countries in the northern hemisphere will actually benefit from global warming for some time, because their temperatures, their climate will improve, even their agriculture might get better. But for us, it's going to impact our health, our animals, agriculture, everything. So when we looked at heat action plans to see how much gender has been considered in them, and there are, you can classify them as those who have some incrementally reactive kind of actions, those that have thought a little bit more about gendered impacts of heat, and those which are transformational. We find that there are none of the state heat action plans actually fit into that gender transformational bucket, and only a few of them actually even have considered, thought about, and put in any kind of so for example, we found that women is the fact that women are responsible for, of course biologically women have to give birth to children, but for the child care, for the upbringing, for home managing, for elderly care, all of that, it's usually if the man and woman are both working, the woman has to generally make the sacrifices or play a secondary role. And during COVID, it was interesting, there's enough data to show that while men scientists really advanced in their careers, because amount of publications and the amount of collaboration research went up tremendously in COVID across all disciplines, women scientists' outputs reduced because they had to stay home because the schools were closed, and so they had to take care of the kids. And we'll have growing elderly population, as I was mentioning earlier. So in terms of policies, the Scandinavian countries, I think, always come out on top in any gender index that you look at. And I went to a conference where the Prime Minister of Iceland was saying that she was out marching in the streets along with other women demanding more gender parity. And I said, but you're already way up there. You know, what are you demanding now? And she said, well, we're at 89%. We're not at 100. We still have a ways to go. And so we will continue to protest and demand equality. And the Prime Minister was also out on the streets protesting with everybody. So it was interesting. But Scandinavia is that kind of egalitarian society. But 4 things stood out for me in terms of policies. The first is having childcare facilities. You mentioned breastfeeding facilities, rooms for women. But a creche is really, really important, because otherwise, you know, everyone can't afford to have a house help at home full time to look after the child. And so again, it's the woman who has to stay at home. And most, you know, economies, developed countries do have childcare facilities. The second is equal pay. Equal pay is still a huge issue. I think from time to time we'll hear Bollywood or somebody raising this issue of equal pay. So Hollywood, Bollywood, but also in our salary structures outside of government. Of course, in government there is pay parity, but if you look at minimum wages in many states, still there is a difference between the minimum wage for men and women, even though both are working the same number of hours and doing the same work. The third is child care leave, and again, it's, I think, only in Scandinavia where they have the policy of both parents getting 6 months of child care leave. The mother gets 6 months, father gets. Father cannot transfer that to the mother and say, I'll keep working, you take some more time off. So the father also has to take time off if they want that fully paid leave for 6 months. And those who've gone through that say that it's excellent, not only in terms of being just and equitable, but also in terms of the father developing that bond with the child and actually understanding how much work it is to look after a young child. You know? Otherwise, men tend to be dismissive at times. Yeah, she just stays at home and looks after the children. But how much work that is, you realize when you do it yourself. And the fourth is action on gender-based violence. Again, we may have a lot of rules and policies, but how well are we implementing them? We know that a huge number of women, 30 to 40% in every survey that we do, including NFHS, experience gender-based violence, mostly at the hands of people that they know. It's their own relatives and friends, sometimes the spouse. And that number is very high. So we have a lot of work to be done really on gender-based violence. So these 4 policy levers are there where action can actually lead to practical improvements and enable women. The other is mid-career, I think, support, mid-career training. I'm part of a group called Women Lift Health, which is a global initiative that was started a few years ago, actually funded initially by Melinda Gates, which is trying to build this leadership in mid-career women. Started with the health sector, and India now partnered with the Department of Biotechnology, so there's a Women in STEM leadership program as well. So what this does is it takes a cohort of women every year. I think now 30 women from health and 30 from science. We need much more, but it's just starting. And you go through a 1-year structured course. It's mostly online and some in person, and you're mentored by someone as well. And you have this peer group with whom you're constantly sharing, and you're given some of those tools and some training to be able to deal with issues. So these are real. Obviously, then if you're in a cohort of 30 women, you will share. Each one will share what they are going through or what they've gone through, how they've dealt with it, and somebody else might have a good idea on how they did it. So I think leadership development is going to be very critical if we want to see women in leadership positions, because it doesn't come naturally to everybody. And women are conditioned to not be ambitious, to take a back seat, to put nobody asks a man, do you have a work-life balance? But women are always challenged on, are your children suffering? Is your family suffering because you're away at work? So, so those skills of how to deal with this and building that confidence that there is no challenge or a profession or anything that a woman can't do as well as a man, and there's no reason why there shouldn't be women at 50% parity at all levels in the organization. Of course, there are things like flexible timings and some policies which can support women who want to take a year or two off and then come back to work. Those are things which are happening. Department of Science and Technology, I think they've set up several committees to look at these things, and there have been recommendations made. So there are policies in government where you can re-enter even if you've taken a break in career, so that you're given some special grants and things to come back in and establish your career. You need male allyship. So it's one thing to have women supporting women, which is very important, especially good role models. But in my own life and experience, it has been men, male bosses that I've had who've actually been the ones who've supported, encouraged, and pushed me to take up challenges which otherwise I was a bit nervous or inhibited to do. So despite the fact that I had all of that background, training, experience, even I felt diffident when it came to certain choices, certain maybe job applications that I had to make where I felt that I maybe wasn't ready for it, not good enough, etc. It was my male mentors and bosses who said, you must apply, you have to do it, you are good enough, and you will contribute. So having male allies who also point out things like, I will not be on this panel if it is all men. Okay, so I think that's another thing we all need to be very sensitive to, that you cannot have an all-male interview panel, you cannot have an all-male, anything, representation, leadership. Now, of course, even in boards, company boards, it became 2013, the Company Act was revised, that every company board had to have at least one woman. But even then, it's gone from 4% to 13% or 14% today, representation of women on company boards in India. So like that, you can look at many different statistics. I mentioned, women parliamentarians, women heads of government agencies and things like that. There is still a very big gap. So I think there has to be sort of proactive and affirmative action, and some of these things will have to be strictly followed, I think, if you're going to make a change more rapidly rather than more slowly. As you know, the UN has looked at data from around the world and said it will take 200 years to achieve gender parity if we go at the speed at which we are going now. This is global. We don't want to take 200 years. So we've got to look at those things which can help us, get there faster. And I think men obviously have to play a very major role, because unless a man in that critical position steps aside for a woman or helps that woman, he may have to take, personal sacrifice in the process. But that is the only way that this whole thing is going to change, and then after some time it becomes quite normal. So I think I will stop there, because one can go on and on with this topic, but I think you wanted to have a little bit of Q&A and discussion. So thank you.
What an enlightening session. Thank you, Dr. Soumya. Now we will open the floor for a few questions. Please raise your hands if you have few.
It will be nice to hear from the school students what their experience is.
Ma'am, wonderful, insightful talk. You're very right in the sense that a lot of men like myself are completely blind to what the other gender is going through. Ma'am, one specific case of marginalized women, and I think we've all faced that being in Delhi, is our domestic help. So we've often seen domestic help, I've heard and I've seen it myself also, getting abused physically by their husbands. And we prod them, we tell them that we'll go to the police station with you, we'll file a case. But as you said, from a psychological perspective, they're very held back. They don't want to take that step, even though that man is not even contributing anything to the household income or anything. And also, we've also seen a lot of young girls getting into domestic help. And we tell them that why don't you send them to school, or it's their board exam, etc. They said that who's going to pay the rent? So we can probably help one or two of them, but from a systemic point of view, maybe some work that your foundation does. How do we in urban places, at least the marginalized women we are in contact with, what are is there any tangible steps we can take to improve the situation?
Yeah, I think this is it's a serious issue, right? And it goes with the data I was saying that 40% of Indian women say they've experienced gender-based violence, and it's a part of life for many of them. And unfortunately, the other survey that shows that that women, girls, accept domestic violence as part of life. Okay, again, about 40% of women think it's part of life and just have to live with it. So it's sad that we get conditioned like that. In terms of I think what we can do, those of us who have the opportunity or we have the capacity, is to at least tell them about the government schemes and opportunities. Because actually government does have a lot of schemes, to support particularly women or people from weaker sections of society, but they are not aware and they don't know how to access those things. So one is to give them that information and that knowledge. Other, of course, is personal help, whatever one can do. But it's talking to them about that. And I think particularly, when it comes to education of the next generation, that is really, really important. I think many women, they sacrifice their own life. They say we will work, but we want our children to have a better life. So they do everything possible to see that their child actually gets educated. It's only when things are extreme that they pull them out, and of course then they usually pull the girl out first rather than the boy. So this is where I think we need to create that awareness. But also I feel that for kids in school, at least those who come from very marginalized backgrounds, they don't immediately see a big benefit of education. The young people I've spoken to in tribal areas, they say तो क्या फ़र्क पड़ता है हमें, हम 12th pass कर लेते हैं, BA कर लेते हैं, and then what? There's no job that we can do. So I think career counseling and giving them different vocational options is a much better way of getting people into basically earn an income right after they've done their training, because this BA and BSc is getting them nowhere, and yet that's the only path they see, because that's what they hear about, कि BA कर लेना चाहिए, BSc कर लेना चाहिए, BCom, and then there's nothing. So I think in high school we have a lot of work to do to build awareness and give them those vocational options, which again I think we have so many skill development programs and all that, but these kids are not getting linked to those. I don't have really good answer actually for the question that you asked.
We will take one.
There are many women who are financially dependent on their husbands and who go through domestic violence, and they also have their kids. So what steps can be taken for them to actually divorce their husbands and maybe live their own independent life? Because even finding jobs is very difficult in this competitive, environment. So what to do for them, for their betterment, and how can we motivate them to take the right step? Because it is very difficult to sustain, without any education maybe. So what to do about that? That was my question.
Yeah, you're very right. So I think economic empowerment is really the path, to that kind of emancipation or independence. Because as long as you're economically dependent on someone, you don't have any choice. You can't leave. The moment they feel that they can earn a living, and this is at all socio-economic groups, even if you are a well-educated woman but you don't have a job, you're dependent on your husband, and you have a young child, you're not going to leave, even if you are very unhappy. So what we've seen, and again I've heard from these women in the field who've told me their own experiences of how the men actually start respecting them more when they see that they're bringing in an income completely independently through any new skill that they have been given. And so then the men also change their behavior, there's more respect. these people get a voice in the community as well. We do have more panchayat leaders now, also women, strong women, and they're forming self-help groups, they're forming cooperatives, they're forming these companies. Even these illiterate women are forming farmer-producing companies and things. All what they lack is this financial literacy and market linkage kind of information management skills. If you can give them that, then sky is the limit actually for them. So it's a question of giving them those tools. The rest we don't even have to tell them; they just do it on their own. And there's a complete transformation. So I've spoken to women where 30 years ago they were young women, they were at the mercy of their menfolk, and how the foundations work, and today they're absolutely leaders and bold, very, very bold, articulate, and they become champions. So it takes a time to undergo that transformation, but it all starts with, I think, economic empowerment through knowledge and skills.
This is truly insightful. Now, on behalf of everyone, I would like to bring her expertise with us today. I would like to invite our director, Professor Rangan Banerjee, to present a token of appreciation to our esteemed speaker. Please put your hands together for Dr. Soumya and Professor Banerjee. Would like to officially conclude today's event by inviting Professor Dean Academic, Professor Kroot, to deliver the vote of thanks. Please put your hands together for the professor.
It's been an absolute privilege to listen to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan in person. She was the face of COVID, for me at least. And along with the NIH director. But now we've had the opportunity to hear her in person, and her thoughts and her the experiences that she has recounted to all of us should serve as food for thought. There's something that the director mentioned briefly. I would like to just read out something which is there on the board outside, where people have written a few messages, and something which the director also talked about, and it says that I wish we didn't have to celebrate a single day to prove equality. We hope that situation arises. It doesn't take us 200 years to reach that stage. So once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Swaminathan for having accepted our invitation to be here. I would like to thank IJES, which is the Initiative for Gender Equity and Sensitization, which is a vertical of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, who sort of started this, and the Associate Dean Outreach and New Initiatives and our team, Professor Shilpi Sharma, who put this together. And let's keep this conversation going. In the afternoon, we have another event here, which is again hosted by Shilpi and the Associate Dean Faculty, Shuchi Sinha, which is called Baaton Baaton Mein, a little bit less formal event. So we hope to see you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kroot, for your kind words. That brings us to the end of the celebration. Thank you all for being the part of this special occasion. Let's continue celebrating the spirit of International Women's Day together. Thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead.